Let's speak to our panel now. We'll run through some of the big news stories of the day. Let's speak now to Sean Kemp, former head of political communications for the Liberal Democrats. Good morning to you, Sean. Good morning, Sean Kemp.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, we can. Welcome along. Happy Boxing Day to you. And Portia Berry-Kilby, freelance writer and political commentator with Young Voices. Good morning to you, Portia. Happy Boxing Day.
Morning, happy Boxing Day.
Sean, let's start first of all by just a bit of reaction to the death of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We had Lord Peter Hain there speaking about working with Desmond Tutu, and he had some really lovely things to say about what a vibrant personality he was, but also defiant as well in managing to end apartheid.
Yes, I think what maybe gets forgotten now about Desmond Tutu was there was a period of time when Mandela was in prison, where the ANC was still described as a terrorist group and was actually, strange as it may sound now, controversial to some people. And at that point, Archbishop Tutu was the key voice about apartheid on a worldwide stage, who, because of his position, because frankly of his demeanour and his personality, was the leading global voice against apartheid, and was absolutely crucial in the campaign, particularly during the 80s, in a way that, in a strange way, even though we're talking about him a lot now, I think people now almost think the fight against apartheid, they think of Nelson Mandela, right? They think of the ANC. You can sort of get what a crucial figure Desmond Tutu was during that whole period of time, in terms of really harnessing global support for the campaign.
Yeah, true, indeed. Thank you very much, Sean. Portia, I'm going to use you to head into the first story, if that's okay, as we talk about COVID restrictions. We know that they may come into place this week in England to help reduce the spread of Omicron. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, those three nations have all introduced curbs on hospitality and leisure. They've resumed social distancing rules and put limits on the size of gatherings. Those restrictions came into place today. So I think many people asking, as we were before Christmas, really, about how long England can hold out, and also whether we will hold this out, whether we have perhaps ridden out the worst of the Omicron wave so far. Portia, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be terribly misjudged, actually, if Boris does introduce any new restrictions. He had a tough enough time trying to get through the last lot of restrictions through Parliament, and we saw lots of Tory rebels, and I think only more will join those ranks as he tries to push through more things straight after Christmas. It's been 2 years almost, if not full performance for a variety of industries, and to smack more restrictions on at this point, despite a huge uptake of the booster, most people are double vaccinated. It doesn't seem the smartest move in terms of the economy or people's patience, to be quite honest.
Yeah, we've had that news on first and second jabs. So the number of first doses of a coronavirus vaccine given in England between the 15th and 21st of December were 46% up on the previous week. So there has been, by and large, a bit of an increase in uptake on the vaccine as a result of Omicron, which is encouraging. The Prime Minister is expected to review the latest data tomorrow, Sean. Admissions to London hospitals have increased 92% week on week. What do you think is going to happen? Does he need to save face and bring in some sort of restrictions to keep that side of his party happy, but not too many to keep those conservative rebels under some consideration?
Well, I suspect what he has to do is try and work out what measures he can bring in that don't lead to him having to have a vote in Parliament. Because if he has to have a vote in Parliament, then there's going to be a rebellion, as Portia was saying. There'll be a rebellion of maybe like 150 Conservative MPs. And he just can't have that at the moment. The politics of it doesn't really make sense for him. It would be sort of cataclysmic. So he's got a whole bunch of Conservative MPs who see this as kind of being some sort of dystopian future of, if you have any more lockdowns, you can't do it. Weirdly, lockdowns are still kind of popular with the public, but you get a sense the public mood is starting to turn. You see increasingly people saying, do we really need to do this again? And I think he'll try to do what soft measures he can do to try and limit mixing and keep hospital numbers down without having to do anything that would be wildly controversial. For example, shutting schools, which I think would cause his party to explode in fury.
Yeah, well, we've seen on the front of the Sunday Times today, schools will open despite the surge in Omicron cases. Boris Johnson very defiant about that, and he's relayed that instruction to Nadhim Zahawi, the Education Secretary, who feels along similar lines, so we understand. We haven't reached the peak of this wave yet, Portia, and whether it's 10 days or 14 days, and there's some fallout about that on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, a line about dodgy data and how Jenny Harries used 17 days as the lag between becoming infected and requiring hospitalisation, and whereby it might actually be more like 10 days. I think it's just that we've got more up-to-date data now. But anyway, whatever you go for, there's an argument to say, number one, the peak of this Omicron wave is meant to be the middle of January. I'm not sure if that's still the case within the last few days, but that's certainly where we were a couple of days ago. And also that we've not even seen the start of, true concern about hospitalisation figures. That could all still happen.
Yeah, and the hospitalisation figures is always the slightly more concerning thing, especially compared with cases, as cases are skyrocketing. But most of those is not even as bad as the flu, even for people who aren't vaccinated. It's for the majority of people, it's not a death sentence. Of course, as hospitalizations increase, that's always something to watch. But once again, in terms of dodgy data, have to make sure that that is people being admitted to hospital for COVID and not with COVID, as that does just sway the numbers and gives unnecessary alarm, which I don't think is helpful from any angle when tackling COVID.
Sean, in your former role as a special advisor for the Lib Dems, how much attention, if you were in a similar position for the Conservatives right now, how much attention would you be paying to the Times story? It's a poll specifically commissioned by the Sunday Times. Nearly 25,000 people were asked about their voting intentions. And the upshot of it is that Labour seems to have opened up an 8-point lead over the Tories. This was in data taken between the 21st of December and the 1st of December. How much significance should we read into that?
Well, it's significant because it's a long time since we've seen Labour have any kind of healthy opinion poll lead, so it matters from that perspective.
Although over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Keir Starmer has had a significant lead, anything from sort of 3 points to... Was it 12 points at one time post-Partygate?
Yeah, so when I'm saying a long time, I'm saying over the last few years.
Right.
And also significant in opinion polling terms, without getting too techie, is you've got to be above 5%, because other than that, you're in sort of margin of error territory.
Okay.
So it matters. It matters because it makes Conservative MPs get nervous. I think we have to remember Ed Miliband consistently had much bigger leads than this during mid-term. So it matters, but in a sense, what it really matters is not does it predict what will happen in the next election, because it's too far away. Election campaigns do change things. Why it matters is because it will make a load of Conservative MPs who, this poll in particular helpfully lists all the seats that are going to be lost. It makes all those people very, very nervous about their jobs, which makes them worry about Boris Johnson. And that's why I think people in the Tory party will be worried about it. The Boris Johnson advisors will be worried about it. It's because what will this mean for actually our own MPs? And does it mean they start to get worried and agitated about what we're doing? It wouldn't make me think, oh no, we're going to lose the next election. It might make me think, are a load of backbenchers going to say we need to change the leader?
Yeah, so where's this lead coming from? Well, let's just summarise that. Labour would make its biggest gains in the red wall seats that sent Johnson to power in 2019. Also a surge in London, claiming a further 10 seats from the Conservatives. So this was nearly 25,000 people being polled, asked to ask where they would put their vote if there were a general election right now. Labour would experience an urban revival outside the capital as well, taking a further 63 seats that were won by the Conservatives. Places like Reading, Milton Keynes, Northampton. When we spoke to a polling expert earlier, Lord Peter Hayward, he said, Portia, that actually this is completely natural at this stage in a campaign. The ruling party normally takes a hit in a hit in the polls, and that there's nothing particularly unusual. When you read about all the swings that have got to happen to make this happen, it does. It seems to me to be too big, too much of a job for Labour to do.
Well, I guess that's what they also thought with the last election and the Conservatives. But yeah, he's totally right. It has been a decade of the Conservative Party in power, and it's always going to be challenging to maintain that favourability. Of course, Boris's favourability is at a record low. But does this mean that Labour should be rallying for a general election anytime soon? Probably not. I think it would be deemed quite misjudged in the midst of a pandemic, as the government is acting so we are in, to then launch everyone to the polling stations. I think it makes sense to ride it out a little longer for both sides, be it a leadership contest in the Conservative Party or a general election more broadly, to get COVID under a little bit more stability at least, and see what happens in the local elections come May, and see if the fears of the Tory backbenchers and the hopes of the opposition actually do come true.
Very quickly, Sean, will Boris Johnson still be the leader of the Conservative Party and our Prime Minister come the next election?
I think he will, but he's going to have probably a bit of a wobble after the local elections in May this year.
OK, so another warning shot to him. And clearly, I don't know whether it's a bit of briefing or whether it's just all come together as a marvellous coincidence, but Graham Brady, calls growing for Graham Brady to replace the PM. Anyone who wants the PM's job, by the way, so says the front of the Observer, can't be a fan of toughening toughening rules for COVID in the new year. I'm sure there's lots of, I don't know whether it's briefing or whether it's stuff coming from the 1922 committee and those anti-lockdown, anti-restriction MPs, but it feels like there's a bit of a move going on there. Let's talk about Boxing Day plans. Finally, today is, well, it's obviously Boxing Day. We've been hearing from our colleagues at Times Radio all morning about their ideal Boxing Day. Here's Jenny Clemens.
It's Jenny Cleman here, and my perfect Boxing Day isn't terribly original, I'm afraid. It would begin with sleeping in as late as is physically possible, wringing every last bit of sleep out of my eyes until it's not possible to sleep anymore, because I never get to do that. And then I'd go for a long walk with my family in some beautiful old wood in the countryside that miraculously has a cafe in a clearing in the middle of the wood, where I can stop for tea and cake. And then I'd come home and sit on a giant sofa with all of my children and watch a Pixar movie whilst being served champagne by my husband. And there would be no meals all day, no meals at all. We would all just eat cake and chocolate and crisps and cheese and crackers and champagne. That's my perfect Boxing Day. The reality of my Boxing Day is probably going to be being stuck on the M11 on the way to see my in-laws.
I love that. And I love the fact that this large wood appears from nowhere with a cafe that's open serving tea and cake on Boxing Day. Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to be with the in-laws later. So after this, I'm travelling to Kent for a second Christmas day. Yes, I've got to fit it all in again. What are you two up to? Portia, first of all.
Well, I'm going to go to church first, and then do good old British dogged determination of going for a walk on Boxing Day despite the bleak weather.
Yes, I'm looking out the window here. It looks very misty and damp. Sean Kemp, what about you? What's your perfect Boxing Day, or what are you up to today?
What I'm actually up to is I'm apparently responsible for teaching my family the rules of an insanely complex board game that we're going to tackle
Which
today.
one?
So I'm sure. Apparently it's the Jaws board game, which I've just read the rules for, which took me about half an hour. So there'll be barely a crossword, I'm sure, in a few hours when I'm around with my family.
I had no idea such a thing exists. So we've got the Jaws Theatre Show, and we've got the Jaws, as in the shark Jaws board game.
As in the shark Jaws, someone has to swim around and eat swimmers. It's fun for all the family.
Is this a game for children or for grown adults?
I think grown adults, but I think we might be trying to sort of see if some children want to play. I'm not sure they've ever seen the film, though.
Channel your inner child, I think, is the instruction for this one. All right, well, thank you both of you for joining us. That's Sean Kemp, former head of political communications for the Liberal Democrats, and Portia Berry-Kilby, freelance writer and political commentator with Young Voices. Thank you to both of you.